Welcome back to week 6 of Striper season updates with On the Water. I'm Matt Haeffner, and over the next 8 weeks, we'll be bouncing around the Striper coast following different local bites as the bass migrate north. We'll talk to all sorts of credible fishing sources from Jersey to Maine to give you the scoop on how the bite changes over the coming months. Last week, I was joined by Tim Regan. Tim is a drone videographer, report writer here at On the Water, and licensed New York surf fishing guide on Long Island. Tim and I discussed fish up to nearly 40 pounds pushing east from the Hudson River towards Montauk. We also spoke about some of his favorite baits and tactics for targeting bass in the surf and in the back bays during the early season. As the migration progresses around Long Island and New York City, bigger fish from 20 to 30 pounds will be using the month of May to push north. Cape Cod saw its first migratory schoolies just over a week ago, and with more fish on the way, it's time to check in on the bite on other areas of the coast. This week, we're leaving Long Island and skipping across the Block Island Sound to check in with Dustin Stevens of Rhode Island Kayak Fishing Adventures. Dustin has spent his spring so far catching schoolie bass and tautog from the seat of his kayak, and even worked his way through a dense school of bluefish during the first week of April. When Tim Regan and I said things were happening early this year, this is Exhibit A. Dustin spends a good portion of his season guiding striped bass anglers around the waters of Rhode Island and Cape Cod using his fleet of Hobie Outbacks. And when he's not guiding new anglers, he gets in on the action himself. Dustin, thanks for joining the show this week, man.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. So you've been, kayak fishing for the past month. Mostly it seems like targeting tog, but you've had your share of stripers and a couple other things here and there. So what have you seen with the rising water temperatures that indicates the arrival of striped bass?
First getting out, we saw like the holdover bite started to change as the water got a little bit warmer. Then early April, I tried to get out there for early season tog, and that bite has gotten better. And now that the fresh fish are starting to come in larger schools, then that's been a pretty good change as well. So
yeah, that tog bite is pretty. It's something I never really got into up until I moved up here. I got into a couple tog with Adam Eldridge of On the Water TV. At the end of last week, right before my first striper actually of on Cape Cod. So that was exciting.
tog are awesome, man. I can ride that bite out until it stops.
Yeah, and it's a good way to keep yourself busy if you're not, into targeting the holdovers and whatnot. But there are plenty of holdovers to be targeted up here. So, what are some of the ways you kind of targeted holdovers in the off season, if you did?
Soft plastic jig head, like light tackle type of stuff, quarter ounce, half ounce, and maybe a 3 or 4 inch plastic. Also, the little Rapala X Wrap that was a key for holdovers, both the shallow diving version and the deep diving version, depending on where they were in the water column.
Yeah, so usually, it seems to me like the holdovers tend to hug that muddy bottom. So I don't know if a sinking one helps, but that suspending lure, for whatever reason, seems to really just tantalize them when it sits there in the water column. And I think that, I've been using jigs like this since the beginning of the season because I think they're really still, hugging that bottom for the most part, especially in backwater. But I have found fish on top water. They've been following my spook. I've just been throwing it to kind of check things out. But I've been throwing, to start the season because I didn't really chase holdovers. I started the season with just a little guy like this. It's just a 4-inch white, basic, kind of like a Kayak swim bait, paddle tail. And the I forget what brand is. I Strike Jigs. Actually, I think I got some right here. So they make these really cool jig heads that are actually called the Striper Eye Jig. Make them in different couple colors. I've been using them in gold and red, and they're a half ounce. They sink real nice, and they got sharp VMC hooks right there.
That's all you need. Same thing as far as the holdovers, small jig heads like that, little plastics, and the little Rapala carried me through a big part of the holdover season. And then once they kind of got a little skittish, then I was still on largemouth too. So I kind of float between species, whatever I wake up and feel like targeting that day, unless I'm guiding. Obviously there's a there's a particular species that we're probably targeting, but
you've been out in the water for about a month now. So what kind of bait did you see in the beginning of the season, if any at all? I know the water's been real cold around here up in the Rhode Island, Cape Cod area. But what kind of bait were you seeing, if at all, in the water compared to now? Because I've been seeing all sorts of stuff in the water the past week.
The earliest bait that I saw during the season was herring. Starting to see the herring runs, and now it's squid. I'm hearing reports of bunker. I haven't seen any, but the fresh fish are around, so they're chasing something up the bay. That's pretty much it as far as bait fish that I've seen, and obviously squid.
No, I was gonna say I've been seeing pictures of you on Instagram with squid. So do you find that that kind of helps produce a better bass bite, and how does that influence what you throw around those bass?
I don't really mimic squid too much. I've used the Chase Baits Ultimate Squid jig before, which is an actual little plastic squid. It's pretty cool, and I've caught like smaller fish on that. But in general, when squids start to show up, I'll use pink presentations like the gravity tackle eel, the pink, 9-inch lure, something that we think imitates squid. Or sometimes just throwing live squid for, I mean, not live, but throwing, actual squid from shore.
So that reminds me, I was gonna ask you, do you ever throw like bucktails and stuff like that when you're fishing with your clients?
If they want to, I do troll a lot with clients. I just find that it's a easier search tool in most situations. We kind of trolling over waypoints and stuff. But if we get into an area where they're just thick, then we can change the presentation up to throw soft plastics or SP minnows, Yozuris, or even top water. It just kind of depends on what they want to do. But most people feel kind of weird about trolling if they're used to casting and retrieving for striper, and then once they start hooking up a few times, they don't want to put it down. So
That's awesome. Yeah, I never really got into the trolling too much, but I've never had a pedal kayak, so that's definitely something that's on my bucket list. But with a pedal kayak, you're getting the water where there's squid and stuff. I'm more so, shore based. So what I've been seeing in terms of bait, I'm glad you brought up the herring because that's what I'm seeing now, at least up in the back bays and rivers on Cape Cod. I'm 99% sure that's what was bumping into my line last night. Thick schools of herring because they seem to be hitting on anything white. Like I was just showing that kind of white swim bait imitates maybe some small herring fry, but they also were hitting on white mag darters. So anything that seems to be imitating the size and shape or even color of a herring is working right now. But I was observing, just what's going on in the water around me without shining my light out where I was casting, and I'm finding a little spearing around my feet. So there's definitely bait moving in, and I think following that bait is going to be a whole nother push of larger fish. So going back to how you've been catching squid, do you ever use squid or do you fish with bait with your clients at all, or are you strictly artificials from your kayaks?
I do fish with bait a lot. Sea worms are, money for me because I do a lot of tube and worm. So I always try to have fresh sea worms or artificial sea worms. Uh, During the time where we're fishing in the upper bay and there are a lot of bunker schools around, I always have snag hooks and whatever to try to get bunker. And on few occasions, I've taken clients out and we've used live eels. So I'm definitely a fan of bait, but I like artificial as well.
So when you fish with something like eels from a kayak, do you stun them prior because they're not easy to handle?
Either use a live well, like Hobie has like a little live well that you can put in the back of your kayak to just keep them lively. They're harder to deal with when they're lively like that. But plan B would also be to just put them in a bucket and drill a couple holes, stun them like you said, and live line them.
I mean, I know Narragansett Bay is really deep, so most of the time, are you jigging off the bottom with your clients, or do you find that, like you said before, I know that it's kind of based on what they want, but if you want to find fish, you kind of have to have some influence over that.
Absolutely. Yep. So we always start trolling unless we see fish like busting up on top. Then we immediately go to top water. Or if it's a client that, they may not know how to work a top water presentation, like walking the dog, then we'll do something like an SP minnow or some type of shallow, subsurface lure that, is almost a top water, or even skip soft plastics over the top weightless. That's an option. But I would say 80% of the time we start trolling either a hard plastic lure or a tube and worm, just to find fish. And, being out there all the time, I have plenty of waypoints marked. So we just kind of, go over my waypoints and see what we find.
So when you're throwing those, I just remember you said soft plastics. You throw them weightless. What kind of soft plastics do you typically throw? Something like a Sluggo on there?
GT eel is the preferred soft plastic that I've used and had success with. I've tried the hoagie as well. I've gotten a few smaller fish on that, but I would say as far as the go-to plastic, it would be the GT eel. But I caught my biggest fish last year, my second biggest fish last year, actually on the Z-Man Dormatador. I was actually fluke fishing, kind of rapid vertical jigging, and end up with like a 45-inch striper on there.
Yeah, it's a nice surprise. And I was going to say, speaking of surprises, you got into Uh, something like 30, 35 bluefish in early April, which is almost
Yeah.
unheard of that early up here in southern New England. I know back in Long Island and New Jersey, maybe a couple blues show up here and there, racers in the back bays and stuff following the bait. But what happened? Like, how did you manage to get on that many bluefish of that size that early in the season?
How I don't know. I definitely didn't target them. A buddy invited me out to go to tog fishing. It was what, April 3rd actually, and we tried to be early on the tautog bite, and that didn't happen. We tried all day, and I just went for holdovers like the day before. So I had my little Rapala on my light tackle, rod and reel setup, and we started to mark some fish kind of mid water column, and I threw a cast out. I got my little Rapala broken off, and my buddy casted his SP minnow right behind me, and he ended up hooking up to a fish. We thought that it was striper, which was kind of our plan B, if we didn't find any tautog. And when he got it beside his kayak, he said it's a bluefish. And then from there, we just kept casting and casting. He caught more than I did, but it was definitely about 30 for me. I started with the little Rapala, and then immediately I switched over to the Dormatador. I was telling you that I had a leftover Dormatador just sitting in the mesh pocket of my kayak on the side. So I just grabbed that out of the side mesh pocket, and I got a jig head from my buddy, and I just started throwing it. That lasted me probably about 10 to 12 bluefish before that ended up getting eaten off. And then I switched over to another jig head and plastic that he gave me. So it was just kind of, hey, let me get something else. Let me get something else because I don't want to keep losing Rapala. So
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I remember when I texted you, I was like, this is really weird. And I know you've gotten this question a bunch of times, but is this an April Fool's joke? Because it's a little late.
absolutely. Yeah, it was 3 days late. Everyone said, is this April Fool's? I'm like, I would have done April Fool's on the first if I was going to play along, but I get it. If it's something weird, then you have to investigate to figure it out.
So, how do you start your process of locating fish once you're out on the water with your clients, and does that process change at all, throughout the course of the season? I mean, I know you said you usually start trolling, but is that always your go-to move, even as the bite kind of changes and progresses through June and July and the hot summer months?
I would say it is my go-to most of the time. If I'm guiding somewhere, obviously it means that I've gone there a lot of times. So it's kind of the what stage of the tide, or where are the fish, all that telltale stuff before you even hit the water. And then once you get on the water, you just kind of go over your waypoints. You have your visual cues to see if you see any fish, swirling on the surface or busting up on bait, and you just go at it. But electronics help, tremendously.
Yeah, I was gonna say it must help immensely, especially when you have like a beginner on the kayak. Can you talk about some of the features of your kayak that you kind of, you have what, four Hobie Outbacks that you've outfitted, so you got to make them user friendly, especially if you're taking somebody out like you said who's never really fished before. So how do you do that, and how do you make them, get used to the electronics? How do you help them?
I outfitted the kayaks to pretty much have every client have the same exact experience that I do, as far as the same fish finder that I'm using on the same side, the same type of crate, blase blase. So I want them to be able to experience what I'm experiencing. And I think I can teach easier that way if, I'm not having one thing over here, super premium item, and then them having something totally different, on their kayak. But I like to have electronics on there. It helps with, speed, depth, which comes in handy with trolling. They can have the chart up and side scan up so they can get used to that. And if they have questions about electronics, sometimes we spend, an hour, 2 hours just walking them through different modes on the fish finder in addition to fishing. So a 5 hour day can go by pretty fast, but we try to cover as much as we can.
Yeah, I could definitely use one of those tutorials with the electronics because sometimes it's on a certain screen and it looks like totally foreign to me. I know what a fish mark looks like, and that's about it.
Yeah, the units that I use the Lowrance HDS Live, the 7-inch screens. The side scan on it is really good. The down scan with the fish reveal, it really just the fish just pop on there. So if you're like striper fishing or sea bass fishing, fish that are typically, or bluefish higher in the water column, you know they're there. It's no question about it. They show really clear, and like I said, having the chart up kind of teaches people why I'm approaching a situation the way I am. Like if we're going from deep to shallow, they can see that on the chart, to see where we are in the process.
So, I mean, you have all these user-friendly electronics and stuff on board. What do you decide to outfit your guests' kayaks with in terms of a rod and reel?
I usually go with two setups for every client for most of the year. At certain times in the year, we're just doing, tautog fishing. So it'll just be one heavy duty spinning setup unless they tell me that they are comfortable with conventional or bait casting tackle, which I also use. Um, but typically, most of the season, we'll have a light tackle setup, like a 3,000 size reel, a medium heavy St. Croix, something like that. That they can throw SP minnows, smaller top waters, smaller soft plastics, and then a more heavy duty setup. So if we're trolling bigger lures, or if they want to throw the dock, and we'll have a heavier duty setup for that.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm excited to throw the dock myself this year. I never really threw it too much down on Long Island or anything, but it seems to be the ticket to big bass up on the New England area.
Yeah, I prefer the 7-inch dock. I know a lot of people like the 9 big bait, big fish, but I don't know, just something about the 7-inch dock.
Yeah, yeah, I'll have to grab a couple of those. I think right now I only have the 9 inch laying around somewhere, but I don't even know. I just
That's not a bad place to start.
Yeah, no, it's not. Especially because I could use a new PB, so that would be nice. So a couple weeks ago, during one of these updates, I talked to your buddy Kevin Ryan, and he and I talked about how he practices catch and release, in the waters around New York City, which are notoriously rough and turbulent because of not only the amount of boats are in the area, but it's just a lot of current and stuff going in and out of New York Harbor there. So Kevin uses the torpedo motor and all sorts of crazy stuff to get those fish revived and back where they belong. But what do you use with your clients? Like I can't imagine you have a big motor on all of your Hobies.
No, I'm not. I'm not as rich as Kevin, so I can't. I can't. I can't afford the Torpedo. But I always have fish grips, pretty much this style fish grip on all the kayaks. So the first thing we try to do is secure the fish, make sure they land it. It just sucks losing a fish kayak side, so we try to make sure they secure it, put it in the kayak. After that, put the fish grips in it right away. If they didn't use the fish grips to swing it overboard, then put the fish grips on them right away and leave them in the water until we're ready to take the picture. If they want to take a picture, some people are just, hey, the bite's good, I don't want to take pictures, I want to release them right away. And in those situations, you don't really have to revive the fish as much because you literally had it out of the water for 5 seconds. But if you do want to revive a fish that may be struggling, or if you had a long fight with it, I just use my Mirage drive on the Hobie and the fish grips and try to get the water flowing through its gills. And when it's ready, fins up, tail starts to kick, and that's it.
Yeah, looking for those indicators that the fish is ready to go, like the fins up, and you kind of feel them. You really do feel the life kind of breathe back into them a little bit, and it's a huge difference maker when that fish kicks off and swims back down to the bottom rather than kind of just slowly, cruising off.
Yeah, it takes the big ones a while to get going more than the little ones. Like if you're out catching schoolies, you can kind of, you know, throw them back in the water, kind of toss them in there like you would an albie, and they'll get going right away. Yeah, big fish that you've had a long fight with, you have to handle that with care.
With the fact that you had bluefish coming around in early April, and now there's almost slot sized bass and a lot of Cape Cod's back bays around Rhode Island. I can't imagine it's much different. What do you expect to change in the coming weeks? When do you expect those larger fish to kind of move in?
Well, we've had a decent amount of people catch over slot fish within the past week, so that's always a good sign. I got into a couple slot fish today. Within the next few weeks, we'll start to see more consistent slots and over slot size fish, as more bunkers show up, and I think it'll be a lights out spring striper bite.
Yeah, it seems to be making out for a great spring, and that's to say that across the coast. I think Tim Regan and I last week were talking about how everything seems to be happening early down there as well We had weak fish showing up on Long Island in April. The blues showed up pretty early down in Jersey, so I know they're making their way through New York and Long Island now. So I think in the next couple of weeks, everything's really going to kind of take off here. It's amazing how much quicker things kind of take off rather than the progressive bite that kind of forms down south where I used to live. That's another thing I talked with Kevin Ryan about. How do you keep in touch with people and how do you notify people where you're going on the water? It's a safety concern when you're being out. With boat traffic is one thing, but just being out in open water in general, there's obvious safety hazards that go with it. So, do you have a VHF radio or anything like that?
I always carry a VHF radio for me and my clients, just in case anything happens. A lot of times when they see me, pull out the radio, they're thinking like, how far away are you going to be from me? And I'm like, we're not going to be that far apart. We just have this as a safety precaution. But if I'm going out by myself, which I do, pretty often, I'll tell my wife, where I'm going and kind of a general time to expect, me back at the house. But sometimes the bite dictates you being out there a little bit longer. So, she'll call me and make sure that I'm okay, and I'll keep fishing. Definitely a safety flag is a good thing to have. The reflectors on the kayak and on your PFD help, and a radio is a good idea.
Yeah, I didn't even think about the reflectors, but especially if you're going out, like I think you were out for squid the other night, so that's something that would definitely come in handy there. And do you need I guess running lights or anything like that on a kayak as well?
You don't need them. They're good to have. I've never had them on my kayaks. If I go out at night, it's pretty much my 360 light that I use from Yak Attack. I'll use a headlamp, and then my reflectors. That's kind of all. It's kind of a bare bones approach, but it's good enough. And most of the time, if I go out at night in the saltwater, I'm with someone.
How can people find you on social media if they want to, book a trip with you or kayak with you this season, and keep up with you just in general over the rest of the spring during the bite?
My personal Instagram is Dustin Goes Fishing. My business for Rhode Island Kayak Fishing Adventures is RI Kayak Fishing Adventures on Instagram. Our website, which has pretty much all the details on how much a trip costs, what you can expect, etc., is www.rikfa.com. I don't think I'm on anything else. I'm on TikTok too, but that's kind of a new thing I'm just playing with. So that's also Dustin Goes Fishing. So.
Gotcha. Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, Dustin. It's been a pleasure having you on, man. And I hope you get out on some more stripers before the end of the week.
I'm kind of entering striper mode. It's Tautog is still, fresh in my mind. So that's the focus as of right now. But
yeah, well, you can check your first slot fish off the list, right?
That was my first sea lice fish of the year. A nice 28 incher.
Awesome, man. Well, it was good hearing from you, and thanks again for joining this week.
Same here, Matt. Nice talking to you as always.
All right, take care, Dustin.
You too. Bye-bye.
That's all the time we have for this week. Thanks again to Dustin Stevens of Rhode Island Kayak Fishing Adventures for joining us. Fishing from a kayak is an exciting and immersive way to target striped bass. There's no better way to get up close and personal with some big Rhode Island stripers. If you'd like to book a kayak fishing trip with Dustin, you can find his website and Instagram in the description below. With quality fish moving in around Rhode Island and Cape Cod, May is off to a hot start. The arrival of migratory slot-sized fish is right around the corner, if they're not here already, with plenty of mid-20-inch fish flooding the bays and salt ponds. Bass are following large schools of herring, which seem to be keying in on small bait like worms and grass shrimp as they run up the rivers. But that buffet of bait is about to grow in the coming weeks. When you're out fishing, observe your surroundings and keep your eyes on the water for signs of bigger fish arriving over the next week or two. Now that May is here, Striper Cup is underway. If you haven't signed up, that's okay. You can still join in on the fun using the link below in the description. Remember to like and subscribe to our channel, follow us on social media at On The Water Magazine, and check back next week for more Striper season updates with On The Water.